Hello everybody, welcome back to Invisible UX. After a lot of requests, I finally put together a video of a portfolio walkthrough. So I hope you enjoy. Up at the upper left, a couple of menu options, homework about contact. Wouldn't recommend putting more than 4 menu options up here just to keep it uncluttered. A nice tranquil image that has nothing to do with UX, but hopefully as recruiters and hiring managers visit my site, it relaxes them and gets them ready to enjoy my work. So a quick little note, kicking off, just a really quick intro or something, note about yourself. So here I've got a picture. Probably better to have a picture where you're smiling. I like this sort of like contemplative look. And then a couple 1 or 2 liners. So really a punch statement that explains who you are very succinctly and clearly. So a strong leader and seasoned designer with superior communication and collaboration skills. I have nearly 14 years of experience in the creative field as an architect and UX designer. Here's the kicker. Tagline, building on my expertise designing physical spaces, I am passionate about providing delightful and intuitive experiences in digital space. So that really covers my background in architecture and transition from the physical environment to working in the digital environment. So moving to my work, you can see it's very short. Intro, very easy to get to my work. I have a handful of projects. It's been suggested to me by recruiters and hiring managers that everybody uses this sort of pixel perfect hero image as their representative image for their project. And it can get kind of boring. So I've noticed that people appreciate seeing the rougher sketches, the crazy eights here, the generative stuff. So we've got very rough sketch for Oyster, a more pixel perfect design for Just Go, another series of sketches for City Pups, and then the logo for the company I worked for, 360 degrees on their project. So high level before we dive into one of my projects. The About has a little more background. My background is really focused on architecture, and I'm going to update this soon. I think I need to focus more on what I'm doing in UX and not what I did in architecture. So going back to work, let's dive into Oyster, probably one of my stronger projects and one that I really like to share with recruiters and managers during interviews. So we kick off at a very high level with that final product. So we want to entice people who are looking at your site to continue reading, especially if it's a hiring manager or a recruiter. They're spending 30 seconds, a minute, maybe a couple minutes max on each person's site just to kind of confirm what this person does is what they're looking for in the role. So entice, very high level outline of the project. Oyster was created in early 2020 in an effort to help those unable to travel due to financial, mobility, or other reasons explore the world virtually from anywhere. So very high level description of what the project is. Next, the challenge. What problem are you trying to solve? A high level outline of what it took to solve that problem. What tools did you use? For example, I used Sketch, a prototyping tool, InVision, Proto.io, which is a mass user testing tool, as well as InDesign. Describe your role. Hiring managers and recruiters want to know if you worked in a group, and if so, what was your involvement? What was your contribution to this project and to the group? Also include the timeline. So kicking off, I always like to include a lot of images. We're all visual people. The recruiters and hiring managers that are going to be reviewing your site are visual people. So try to focus on telling the story as visually as possible with a little bit of text to support your visual message. So I have lots of screen captures, a little drop shadow to make it visually intriguing, showing the types of questions asked in my initial screener survey and the results. So again, lots of colors, lots of graphics, different types of charts to convey the information. and then sum that visual information up with some insights in a bullet list format. So what I've summed up here is, based on the survey results, here's a description of my ideal user of this product. So next, I moved on to user interviews. Now the appropriate users have been selected from the initial screener, and it's time to start interviewing and getting a little bit more qualitative data on what they would want in this kind of product, what kind of pain points they're experiencing in the current products that they use, what do they like about the current products, what are the surprise and delight moments. So we list in the portfolio, just to give context, what questions were asked. Include a couple images of your interviews and a couple quotes to give your hiring manager, your recruiter, a sense of what it was like to be involved in those interviews. Don't overload them though. I conducted 4 interviews. 4 images and 4 quotes would be too much, so 2 fits nicely within the framework of the site. So from those initial user interviews, insights were gathered and organized into an affinity diagram. So for each of these 4 blocks represents a different user that was interviewed. Each of these blocks over here represents a commonality between issues that were noted. For example, not necessarily issues, but preferences. I prefer to use public transportation instead of rideshare. I prefer to use Google Maps instead of a printed atlas. So these affinities are starting to group together. And in step 3 to the right, I start assimilating the data and establishing higher level overarching statements that can sort of cover those more raw, rougher insights that were gathered in the interviews. We have a little bullet point list summary of the insights gathered, which are ultimately used in the generation of a user persona. Now, Felicity Warner doesn't exist. She's actually the amalgamation of the 4 interviewees that I had, but it serves as a representation of the ideal user or the typical user for a product. So in this particular graphic, we're showing her preferences between the types of tours that she likes, how does she like to get around, her comfort level with travel booking sites, as well as other forms of technology. So now that we've established an ideal persona, we are setting up our how might we questions. So for this project, we wanted to allow travelers to become familiar with the destination prior to their arrival, help them gain the courage to explore an unfamiliar place like a local, so kind of go off the beaten path, and also educate travelers to the variety of digital tools available to help make trip planning less intimidating. So moving on, now that we have an idea of what this is starting to look like, I did an exercise called solution sketches, which is sketching out a different idea, taking no more than 1 minute, as long as you need to. So I think I created about 40 different sketches, varying in quality and legibility, but I wanted to include just a representative handful of sketches that conveyed the stronger insights, as well as, started responding to these initial how might we questions. So now we're starting to look at how this product is set up with a user flow diagram. We know what it wants to do generally up to this point, but now we're starting to figure out what kind of screen, what appears on the screen, what screens are there? Where is the user able to make decisions? What are those decisions? Where is the user inputting information? Where are results coming out? And basically, what is the user flow of a particular task, which is represented by this user flow diagram. So this user flow diagram represents just one task, and typically there will be multiple user flow diagrams for any particular product or feature. So now that we've established a high-level structure for the product, we're starting to sketch out screens, very high level, and at the early stages, they're literal sketches. I did these digitally with a program called Autodesk Sketch on my iPad, but very rough, very quick, and that's intentional because for those initial rounds of user testing, you don't want to put hours and hours of work developing high fidelity mockups only to significantly overhaul them after your first and second rounds of testing. You want to put together something very basic, get in front of users, get the data, visualize the insights, and then go back and tweak and repeat the process. So as that process continues, it's all about iterating. So you learn from your users, from the testing, you go back, you add a little bit more information, a little bit more fidelity to your mockup. Go back, test that, tweak it, add more fidelity, add more information, and so on and so forth. And you can see that with the first round being hand sketches, the second round being more digital creation, albeit very low fidelity wireframes. This is also tested, data is gathered, and insights collected, and then put into the first round of high fidelity mockups. So we can see here now the screens are starting to take shape. There's some significant UI that's been incorporated, and it's starting to, really look cool, really, represent the initial idea of the product. So showing your user testing, again, we don't want to overload your site's visitor with too much text, but you do want to support the images with text and provide sort of a contextual narrative. So I outlined what steps the user was asked to take, what tasks they're asked to achieve during user testing, and then throw a couple very high level insights, include your more significant insights that were gathered during that testing. So I had probably 8 or 10 different insights, but I wanted to include the 4 most relevant to the project and the 4 most critical. So after that round of user testing and after the insights were gathered, the mockups were updated again for a second round of high fidelity screens. So I have a little bullet list of what was changed based on the user responses, based on the quantitative and qualitative analysis, based on user feedback. And then an example of select screens showing those updates that were made. So just for comparison's sake, looking at the first round of high fidelities, we can see the bottom menu is quite flat. It's not very dimensional. It might even be a little bit tough to distinguish between the Explore and Save buttons. Notice there's a map icon that is intended to take the user to a map view. Those were the most critical things that were changed. So now we have bottom menu bar buttons that are more dimensional. They have a drop shadow. They're separated. And they have rounded corners. We also the map icon was converted to a map list toggle. Users were having difficulty switching back and forth between the map and list view. Even though I saw this little drop pin as sort of a more ubiquitous, universal icon, other users that were tested did not. They were also confused about how to get back to that list view. I thought the back arrow would be enough, but it wasn't sufficient. Hence the map and list toggle. There's no back button. It's very clear. We have diagrams or icons as well as text identifying the purpose of those buttons. So another very slight modification was the addition of an informative modal when the user taps the screen. So when they tap, they also see other nearby tours that are available, as well as get a piece of educational information about the attraction they're visiting. Finally, something I always like to do is include next steps, just to show if there's a project I'm working on where I needed to hand it off, or I was hired to work on just a narrow portion of the overall UX. I like to explain, if I had more time, here's what I would have done to improve this product even more. Well, there you have it. I hope you found that useful. As always, drop any questions in the comments. I'll be more than happy to help out where I can. If you saw my portfolio and have any suggestions, again, throw them in the comments. I'm always open to feedback. So until next time, take care.